out for that. But nonetheless, we're glad that all of you are here. And let's bow for a moment of prayer. Heavenly Father, we're grateful to you for this day, thankful for the opportunity that we have to come into your presence, and now to be together in this room to listen to Kevin speak to us about evangelism and missions and inspire us so that we, Father, can be a part of taking your gospel to the world and expanding the borders of your kingdom. We are grateful, Father, for Kevin and Sherry and their safe journey here. We're grateful for the work that they are doing, the work that Kevin has done here this morning. And we pray, Father, that you will be with them as they leave this afternoon and go to another place to work for just a little while. And we just pray you'll bless their lives. Bless Sherry, Father, and the whole family as Sherry is battling this disease. She's such an inspiration as we see her and her beautiful smile and understand her love for you. And we're grateful, Father, that they are here with us today. We pray, Father, that you'll be with all of us, that we will give our hearts and our attention to what Kevin has to say from your word today. In Jesus' name, amen. Kevin.
So if you don't know this about my wife, she is a hugging machine. And I have had to realize that all these places that I've gone, I was telling Jason and Casey, in case I ever am tempted to get a little full of myself and go, well, I'm the one preaching and I'm the one doing this and I just have to look at the lines. Give you an example of what I'm talking about. I was in New Albany, Mississippi about a year ago. One of the elders got up and introduced us, said, we're glad to have Kevin and Sherry Patterson here today. Kevin will be preaching for us later. And if you're not following them on Facebook, you should. And by the way, before you leave, all of you should get a hug from Sherry. So I preached the sermon, and I have 3, 4, 5 people waiting in line to shake my hand, to meet and greet me. And I look back, and there's 75 people in line to hug Sherry. So, but I have to tell you, and this is a very simple truth, I hope that the words that I speak, the sermons that I preach, the lessons that I teach, I hope that they are edifying and encouraging. But in the last year, no one has done more encouragement than Sherry. What I do pales in comparison to what she does. So just remember that when you go to get your hug. And by the way, every hug comes with a free back scratch. Just want to point it out to you. So I want to show you something real quickly, and then I do need to get into the pictures that I've got for you. But it was Friday, September 20th, that I heard from Terry Casey. And he said, hi, Kevin, I've been following you on Facebook, appreciate what you're doing. We would love for you to speak for us this year. And that's how that kind of began as far as coming here is concerned. I want to share with you a little bit of our evangelistic journey. Looks like we may, I don't know if you can reformat that, but it may not matter with the pictures. But I'm going to show you some of the things here. On February 25th, and I'll kind of fill in the blanks for you, Sherry and I embarked upon an uncertain future with a hedgehog. Thanks for that. Let me tell you the gist of what that was about to say. But we embarked upon a journey, as I mentioned, her See You Later tour. And we were intending to travel because in her family, her mother has died of ALS. Her brother, Ben, died of ALS. And although if you look up Lou Gehrig's disease on Google and ask for the life expectancy, you'll usually see that it'll say 2 to 5 years. Her mother from diagnosis to death was 2 years. Her brother from diagnosis to death, 2 years. We don't know when somebody's going to live or die or any of that kind of thing. We're not trying to act like we know anything, but we do have a family history from which we judge these things, and right now she's at the 1.5-year point. And so we decided to do some traveling and go around and see people, and as these appointments started booking up, we started going to where I was preaching and kind of trying to organize the travels where we could also see friends and family. And so we jump upon this here. I'm going to go ahead and just jump through this because this is largely what I mentioned earlier. But we set off on not really knowing what was going to be in store for our future. I would no longer be preaching in local work, and so we were spending time together. I wondered, would I go back into that or what? Because with the time that we had left, we wanted to certainly maximize that one of two ways. Number one, being together with each other, and number two, by preaching the gospel. And so we've been able to do this. In the last year, I have preached for over 40 different congregations. And as I pointed out to Jason last night, and Casey as well, if you'll think about that, 4 months were just spent at 3 or 4 congregations. So that means I had a lot of busy Sundays, just like today. As soon as we eat lunch today, Sherry and I head on a 3-hour one-way trip to Poinciana, where I will preach tonight, followed by a 3-hour Fishers of Men class, which will probably end about 9 o'clock. Then Sherry and I hit the road for Midland, Texas. And so she'll sleep, I'll drive. But we immediately started going out, and we started traveling, and virtually every state that we went to, there would be some place that we would stop and preach. Now, there was this one torpedo at a welcome center, so I did have to stop there. But moving right along, we went to Virginia and into Kentucky and Illinois and into Indiana, West Virginia. These folks that are here, because we all live in Florida, we understand that there's such a thing as snowbirds. And we have a lot of snowbirds in Sebring. Well, the folks who are up in the top part, when we preached in Illinois, they were only 30 minutes down the road. We didn't know that, but they came. And interesting stuff, they're not members of the church. But they came to visit us. These other folks are. And so when we were in Mount Carmel, Illinois, we got to visit with them. But we went there and preached. We came down through Kentucky and preached at a number of places. If any of you know who Don Blackwell is, Don Blackwell is the head of GBN, which is the Gospel Broadcasting Network on the internet. He is also one of the elders for the Crossville Church of Christ in Crossville, Tennessee. And so we had the opportunity to speak there. And a lot of times the lesson that I brought is a lesson that I preached a number of times over this last year. It's entitled, When the Faithful Die. And if I don't ever have a chance to share that with you, I'll certainly give you a link to where you can watch it. Because I think it's something, when it comes to death, we don't look at it like we ought to. I know that we know the intellectual information of how we're supposed to handle it, but it's just like this morning. Howard, where are you? Is he in here? Howard, what was that last song we were singing? I'll Fly Away. Okay, did you notice Sherry? Did you notice Sherry when you were singing it? She's down here going, yeah, yeah, you know. Well, she's 4'11" 3/4. We round her up to 5 feet to make her feel good, but she's already ready to fly. And so, you know, she's got the perspective we all ought to have. I had a lady in Sebring come up to me one time, and shortly after Sherry was diagnosed, about 3 or 4 months, but she came up to me and she said, I need to apologize to you. And I is one of those, why? And she said, well, because when you first diagnosed this, yours and Sherry's attitude toward death, she said, I was kind of offended by that. It seemed too cavalier. She said, I've come to realize that's exactly the attitude we ought to have. Death is not our enemy, brethren. Death is our friend. Death is not the finish line. Death is entrance into eternal life with God. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. This is why you find Paul writing about death going, I want to die. He wasn't needing some guys in white coats to take him off to the loony bin. He understood it. He got it. And so we would go around and we would share that message with a lot of people, and it was an uplifting message. But then all of a sudden we had the opportunity to go up to Alaska, and as you can see from those mountain ranges, that was taken right out of the window. All of these pictures are my pictures. And that's taken right out of the window of the plane. It's an absolutely beautiful place, but they are in need of people to preach and teach. The very first place that we went to in Alaska was a place called Soldotna, and we spent the entire month of May in Soldotna, Alaska. Now this is important to know because we're going to talk about another month that we would be in Moose Creek. But I got to tell you something real quick, and how God works providentially. How did I end up in Soldotna? Because a few months before, I was in Hawaii. And we went from the Big Island to Maui to visit the brethren there that we had met a year prior. And as I'm there for only 2 weeks, the very last week that I'm there, a fellow comes up to me and he says, "I heard you teach in a school of preaching." I said, "Yes, sir, I do." He said, "Would some of your students like maybe interning for a month or two in the summer?" I said, "I'm sure they would, but I'm pretty confident my wife and I would." And so he said, "Okay." So I got his number, and I never could reach him. He is from Soldotna, Alaska, and I never could get him. And I came to learn that he often works on the North Slope, which is up near the oil refineries on the north part of Alaska. And so I said to him, or I tried to get a hold of him and I couldn't. So I called the church building and I got a hold of a gentleman, and I explained who I was, and he knew the gentleman, and I said, "Would this be a possibility?" He said, "Absolutely." And so I went up there, spoke the entire month of May. As soon as I got up there, I realized that the guy that I'd met in Hawaii was in a different congregation in the area. And that's how I ended up in this one. But here's the better part. The very first Sunday I preached in Soldotna, a guy who was supposed to go to the other congregation in town and meet his friends, got his instructions mixed up, met there. At the end of the service, he said, "Could you come up to Moose Creek?" So we ended up, because of a double error, we ended up preaching for 2 different congregations in Alaska and getting to know them a lot. It's a beautiful place. You've got moose, you've got eagles, you've got sherry. But it's a beautiful place, but it's also a harsh place. Do you know that 80% of Alaska is inaccessible by road? So you're either going by plane or by boat. But there are a few roads in Alaska. You think about all these roads you've got here. Go to Alaska and go in the interior. Don't go to Anchorage, go to the interior. Anchorage has about 250,000 people in its population. The second biggest town is Fairbanks. Fairbanks has about 35,000. That's how big that drops. So you get away from the southern coast where it's warmer and things like that. You get off into the interior, no roads, not a lot, and they're suffering. They want people to work with them, but they don't have that. Absolutely gorgeous place, no doubt about it. We flew down, when we were done there, we flew down to Washington into Seattle, took a car. The very next week I was preaching a gospel meeting in Wyoming, so we decided to do a little driving in the Pacific Northwest because we'd never been there. And this again is a part of Sherry and me just being able to have some fun, and so we went down through Washington, through Oregon, up through Idaho. We followed the Salmon River north to Salmon, Idaho. And then what's interesting, does anybody recognize those 2 people down standing next to Sherry and me? That's Josh and Kara Blackmer from the Palm Beach Lakes congregation. And guess what they started doing about a year before we started doing it? The same thing we are. We're working with congregations that don't have preachers, don't have a lot of support for substantive teaching. And we weren't there yet, but that's what they're doing. And so they had been 3 months in Salmon, Idaho, working with the church in Salmon. Well, then we made our way to Thermopolis. Thermopolis is the home of the world's largest mineral hot springs. If you see that little thing over here in the bottom right, it's a beautiful, beautiful place. And the hot springs are to the left, but that thing over to the right, about 100 years or so ago, it was an iron thing that looked like a Christmas tree, but it was iron. And it was right over one of the springs. And as these springs bubble up, they leave minerals behind. That thing has bubbled up and left minerals behind for so long over the last century, that's now what it looks like, and that stuff's just as hard as rock. And so it's an absolutely beautiful place. And it is in that river right there that I would baptize another friend of ours that Jason knows, Sean Fishbaugh. And that's him down in the bottom right-hand corner. He also was from school, and we knew him in that area, and he had questioned a lot of his teaching and knowledge and understanding, and so he wanted to make sure he was doing things right. And so we got to spend time with him before leaving and then driving our way down to Colorado, where we would catch a plane and fly back to Florida. We were in Florida almost no time at all, visiting with friends before we came to a congregation called the Eagle Lake Congregation, Eagle Lake Church of Christ in Eagle Lake, Florida. It's very close to Lakeland. So far, in 5 months of travel, March, April, May, June, and July, Sherry and I had been funding all of this ourselves because we didn't really know what we were doing. We were teaching and preaching and visiting and getting to see people we knew, meet people we didn't know. But what we were realizing was this was actually building itself into an actual ministry. And the ministry was that we were seeing congregations left and right that did not have preachers. Now, I am a firm believer that a congregation does not need a located preacher per se, but what I am saying is you do want people who are studied, who know the Bible well, who will get up and proclaim the truth. Sometimes you're blessed to be able to get a man who has gone to school or something and has learned a great deal, or somebody who's just simply educated and studied in these areas. But a lot of congregations, they don't have a lot of money. If you don't have a lot of money, you can't hire someone who's educated. So you do with what you have. But if you don't have a lot, then you may not have as much to offer. And if you've got two places in town, one's the big place that has all the money and all the talent, and you've got somebody over here that doesn't have much, they end up suffering. It's a little vicious cycle. And so Sherry and I started asking the question, what can we do? Is this something that we need to do? Is this an area that we need to start addressing? And the problem is I did not want to go into a situation to where I would need or require or even have to ask for money, because that's one of the things that they have very little of. And so we thought, I wonder if we can raise the support to do this. And so we went to the three elders of the Eagle Lake Church of Christ. One of them is there in the white shirt sitting at the dinner table with us. And we asked all three elders the following question. If we decide to do this work, would you consider overseeing? Yes. I never got the question out. All three of them said yes. In fact, at times I think they're more excited than I am, because they're not talking about Kevin and Sherry Patterson going around. They're saying, I wonder if we can get 6 or 7 other preachers to do this as well. Could we raise enough money to send a lot of people out to help these struggling congregations to grow? Not necessarily in number. God causes the increase. Our job is to sow the seed. Our job is to water it. Our job is to fertilize it. God gives the increase. But the question is, if a congregation does not reach spiritual maturity, they're always going to be struggling. And that's what you see in so many places. So in August of this last year, Sherry and I began this work. And we began focusing on congregations that were basically crying out, help us. The Macedonian call. And so even though right now we're focusing on Florida, because this keeps us close to her doctors and things like that, Sherry has said very simply, she said, if I precede you in death, she says, I want you to keep doing this. And I want to. It's good stuff. We started making our way once again on another trip out of Florida. We purchased our mission mobile. It's parked out front. And a mission mobile for us consisted of a cargo van with 2 seats. We only needed 2. And we dressed it up in the back. We put a bed back there. We put all kinds of things. We don't do debt, so we paid for it in cash. And we absolutely love it. And we're on the brink of another 3-week trip. We leave today. As soon as we leave you all and leave Poinciana, we're on a 3-week trip. But we do this to save money. We can literally live out of that. Somebody says, do you have an air conditioner? No, we turn the key on and leave it running. And that $15 is a lot better than a $200 night in a hotel. And we're good with that. Jason will probably tell you I'm about the cheapest guy you'll ever know. But, and that's okay. I've had some people go, you're not cheap, you're frugal. I'm going, no, I'm cheap. So But we have taken that, and that's where we travel, and because we knew she would need a wheelchair for her bigger, heftier 400-pound wheelchair, then this would be able to do everything that we were needing. And so here I am in New Albany, and just like Sherry's sitting right there, supporting me as always, there I am, and a completely different pair of tennis shoes, might I add. So then we made our way up into Arkansas. I was on my way to preach for the Viola Church of Christ, and it was very interesting. We ran into a situation that I'll explain on our way to Viola in just a minute, and I'll show you those pictures. But one of the things that I did get to do, a little off the topic of our mission, I got to stop up there at the place up in the upper left. Sherry wondered why we were there. We were in the capital city of Missouri, and she wondered why we were at this wrought iron fence gate. And I just rolled the window down and looked at the little eyeball thing, and all of a sudden the doors opened, and we drove in. She wondered what was going on, and we drove around to the back and parked, and we were greeted by basically the Missouri equivalent of Secret Service. And that's when Sherry learned for the first time that we were not simply going to eat dinner with the governor and his wife, who are longtime friends of ours from Missouri, but we were going to spend the night in the governor's mansion. We had the entire third floor to ourselves. I'd like to just point that out, if that means anything at all to you. And after we ate dinner that night, there they are in the bottom left-hand corner. After we ate dinner, we took a picture from their patio, which has the Capitol in the background. And if you'll notice, Sherry ruled the state of Missouri for about 10 minutes there in the bottom right. But, but we had some good fun along the way, made some wonderful memories. And then we made our way across the Missouri into Kansas, where we visited Anthony, Kansas, which was the very first place that I preached 30 years ago. In 1995, Sherry and I had just adopted 2 boys, and we moved up to Kansas, a town of 2,700 people surrounded by wheat on all 4 sides. Wonderful congregation. I like to say that they raised me as a preacher. They were very patient with me and helped me to learn a lot. But this congregation that had 60 to 70 people so many years ago now has about 20. They don't have a preacher, and guess what? They cannot afford a preacher. And so the big mega denomination in town pulls all the people because they've got the lights and the shows and the entertainment, and these brethren are just hanging on. And they're crying out, "Help me." And so one of the congregations we're going to try to work with. And by the way, we've had a baptism right out of that, right after a time when Sherry and I visited there, because I had heard that one young preacher had come through a few years ago and had said something to one of the teenagers that a young person would say, but he didn't think of the ramifications of it. And it was a little harsh, and she took it the wrong way, and it kind of turned her off. And the grandparents that I knew told me about this, so I went in there and preached a lesson on baptism, but from a different perspective and from the joy that Sherry and I share when we're talking about these subjects. And we got a call a week later, and it wasn't just a call, it was a video call from one of the grandkids who was letting us witness this young man be baptized. And so, now we've got another young lady. Keep her in your prayers. Then we jumped into a gospel meeting down in Waurika, Oklahoma. The young man and his wife up in the upper left-hand corner, he's a graduate of the School of Preaching, the Florida School of Preaching. So I went there and we had a weekend meeting, and they have helped to support us in our work. This is an interesting picture here. I told you, I said you have to be willing to do more than just talk. You have to set an example, and I realized that you can't see very much, and although our van is a 2-seater van, we did have a chair in the back. But what's interesting was this was a hitchhiker we picked up. And his name was a name right out of the Bible, but I'll not mention that. But he is a 65-year-old man that had been on the edge of the road in about 95-degree weather outside of Midland, Texas, and he was carrying a 60-pound backpack on his shoulders. He didn't look like somebody carrying a sawed-off shotgun, so I thought I'd, stop by and pick him up. But I went around and he said, I've been standing here for 4 hours and nobody stopped. And guys, it was hot. It was dangerously hot. And for a man that age, dangerously hot. We gave him a ride. We were heading in the same direction for at least the next 5 hours. So we gave him a ride to the southeast corner of Dallas, Texas before we headed north, dropped him off. That's him in the upper right-hand corner, dropping him off. And we had the opportunity to visit with him. We shared phone numbers, and guess what? We're still in contact with him. We're still in contact with him. Do you see the people in the bottom right-hand corner, the young couple there? She was our waitress back in March of last year, 1 year ago now. She was our waitress at a barbecue restaurant in Abilene, Texas. And when we were in Abilene, we went there and ate, and we hit it off with her, and she and Sherry just connected. And so we liked the barbecue and her so much, we went back the next day and ate. And then met up with her one more time before we left because we wouldn't be back to Abilene for a while. But we made really good friends with her. Her name is Gentry. She gave me a call a few months later, and she said, what are you doing March 8th, 2025? I said, I don't know. What am I doing? She goes, would you do our wedding? So why am I heading to West Texas? This coming Saturday, she and her boyfriend Slade are getting married, and we'll be there. People we met at a barbecue place. And yes, I am going to start the wedding by saying, dearly beloved, we are gathered here today because I like barbecue. Then we made our way back into Texas. You see the gentleman in the bottom left-hand corner? This is the most interesting thing. I'd never met him before we ate dinner right there. I had never met him before in my life, but we talked on the phone. During COVID, I put out a weekly Bible study, a weekly live stream on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel. It's called the Evangelist page on both, and the Evangelist channel on Facebook and YouTube. But we put that series of lessons out, and it's a 3.5 year, it's 170-something lessons that start in the beginning and end at the end. And I mean, I'm very pleased with what we were able to do with that. But he got to watching that over the pandemic, and he said, man, I need you to come to Arkansas and preach. I need you to come to Arkansas. And that was very nice and very kind. But he said, when he learned that our schedule was starting to fill up, he calls me, he says, I got 4 congregations you need to come preach for. Really? Yes, really. He has evidently lived there for so long that he called 4 area congregations, says, I've got this guy coming, can he preach there? And they all said yes. So as soon as I got into southwest Arkansas, I preached for 4 different congregations and made our way to Nashville, Arkansas, and preached for the Sunset Church of Christ. Became very close to the brethren here. Now they're established. They've got a preacher, they've got an eldership, they're self-supporting, they're great. But just the opportunity to go there, the opportunity that this one guy said that, hey, you need to preach here, as we're driving out of town, I get a Facebook message from a young lady. And she says, you don't know me, but I have a friend, he's 16 years old, he doesn't do Facebook and he didn't know how to contact you, but he wanted me to let you know that sermon you preached about when the faithful die, he said something about eternity really hit him, and he wanted you to know that he was baptized last night. So I said, give me the boy's telephone number, and I called him, and Sherry and I talked to him and congratulated him, and I warned him. I said, be ready. Problems are going to come. That's a part of it. Don't be surprised when the world hates you. Don't be surprised when your own brethren turn against you. That's part of the package. Just realize that there's no better life than the Christian life. Well, we went over to the Murfreesboro church, and I got to stand in the pulpit where my daddy first preached 70 years ago. I didn't know that until I was there, and Mama goes on the phone, I hear you're going to Murfreesboro. Yes, yeah. She goes, that was your daddy's first full-time position. And I said, really? So that was kind of fun. And then here's Walcott. Walcott was the congregation we never planned to go to. But when we first arrived, you remember when I said we were going to Viola, Arkansas? Well, about 2 hours before that, Sherry and I decided we were going to pull over and go to bed. And that would be in our van down by the river. But that was in our van. And so we come out of a state park, and lo and behold, out in the middle of nowhere, here's this church building. And on top of that, it's a Saturday night, and somebody's washing their van at the church building. So I was like, well, that's a good place to stop. Let me just ask for permission. And this fella, I said, do you think it would be all right? I don't need anything, don't want anything. I just wondered if it'd be all right if we'd park here for the night. And he said, oh, absolutely. And I said, well, and it's something about it, I thought, well, maybe I ought to ask somebody in charge. And he goes, yeah, I'll put you in charge. I'll put you in touch with the lady in charge. I thought that was kind of a unique way of saying that. He didn't mention the elders or the preacher or something. It was a lady who had been there for a very, very long time, and she just was very, very hands-on and very, very helpful. Her daughter was the preacher's wife, and her son-in-law was a 26-year-old kid who had been there for 6 years, and he met his wife there, and they got married there, and he's been preaching there ever since. Very small congregation. They came down to visit with us that Saturday night. Now, I already had my entire month booked. This was back in July. But they were so kind to us, gave us a key, so if we need to go indoors to the restroom or anything, gave us a key. There was even a shower in the church building. Said, if you need that in the morning before you leave. How nice was that? So they said, if you're ever able to be back in this area, please come and preach. I did not have the first Sunday in August open. I made it open. We drove back up to Walcott. I preached there that whole Sunday, spent the day with the brethren there. Wonderful, wonderful people. But just to try to be there, encourage and uplift was very, very important to them. This was where I traveled just in the month of July of last summer. We put over 5,000 miles on that new van, almost new van, within just a little over a month, about 34 days. And then another time, we did about 7,000 miles over the course of a month and a half. But we did a lot of traveling, and we did a lot of preaching. And then we made another trip. We did a cross-country quick trip, almost like we're doing here, but we went all the way to Las Vegas, left our van with some friends, boarded a flight in Las Vegas to Alaska, returned to Alaska, and that's where we would be introduced to the Eielson Church of Christ at Moose Creek, right outside the Eielson Air Force Base. And it's their physical address is, their mailing address is actually North Pole, Alaska, which is a little town about 8 minutes down the road. This is the church building and all of their property. It's a very nice thing. Down in the bottom left is the fellowship hall. Over in the bottom right is the preacher's house that remains unoccupied to this day, since we left back in September. And this is a congregation that is looking for someone to come work with them. They have two men that were the church decided to put them in as elders right after we left. And they're two good men. And they do a lot of preaching and teaching. And they're wonderful men, but they will tell you they would rather have someone with a greater skill set, with a greater knowledge, teaching and preaching. But it's so hard because they can't even get people to apply for the job, much less consider the work. So I was able to be there. I was only 4 hours behind there, but when I would teach at the Florida School of Preaching, my online classes, I would a lot of times wake up at about 3 o'clock in the morning, leave Sherry sleeping in the house, go over to the church building where I would have the marker board set up behind me, my computer in front of me stacked up on songbooks. It was a really rinky-dink operation there. And I would stand there and teach for the next 7 hours. And I was usually done about the time Sherry was waking up. But this, of course, Sherry actually did get to see Santa Claus. We were right outside the Air Force Base. The Alaska socks, which she's wearing this morning, are the same Alaskan socks that she actually got there, the Aurora Borealis up there. These are the two men who are now elders, wonderful, wonderful guys. And these two, the husband and wife, are right now visiting in Okeechobee. And so we've gotten to visit with them, and we'll do so again before they get back. Then we flew back down to Las Vegas, went across Arizona through Nevada into California, where we were able to speak with, I was able to preach for another congregation of people we just met a year ago. One of the things that Sherry and I do when we go through towns, we sometimes stop at the church building just to introduce ourselves. And we developed such a nice relationship with the preacher and his wife there that when we were coming through, they wanted us to come through and preach and share that time with them in Mount Mesa. Then we went to Hayward Church of Christ. Remember Courtney Henderson, who preached in Bolivar after I did? This is where Courtney preaches now in Hayward, California. And I was able to preach for that congregation before suddenly we left on a Sunday night after preaching in Hayward, and I had 5 days to get to Atlanta, Georgia, where I was preaching in a seminar starting that Friday night. So we went along Highway 50, the world's loneliest highway, went through Nevada, went through Utah, into Colorado. Just beautiful imagery. Sherry was asleep during the top right, but that was sunrise as I was driving. The sun was coming up over the mountains, just absolutely beautiful. Made our way to Bolivar, Missouri, to the Highway 13 Church of Christ, which we helped to begin about 21 years ago. And so guess what? They're struggling. They've struggled with getting preachers, but they had one recently that unfortunately was preaching that we need to return to the Old Testament. We need to return to the Sabbath. We need to return to worshiping on Saturday rather than Sunday. And he unfortunately took a group of people away, and that's, from what I understand, that's exactly what's happening. They are now worshiping on Saturday. It has left the congregation maybe 12. And so guess what they're doing? They're crying out, help us. Help us. I did stop off in Metropolis on my way. Someone, obviously without my knowledge, took a picture of me when I wasn't looking, but I thought I would share that with you. Then I finally made it to the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia, to the Avondale Church of Christ in Decatur, Georgia, where I had a seminar that weekend, Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday, and then we headed straight south. Why? Because we were about to have a hurricane hit. And so that was our last hurricane back in October, and we showed up 2 days before to get our house in order, literally, and then we had to clean up, and that's the picture after the hurricane, so we had to clean up and everything, get everything back in order, and then although I was scheduled to start a gospel meeting in Haines City, California, we very quickly brought that to a conclusion. I spoke for them Sunday morning, and then we just had that gospel meeting a little while ago. This is when we went to Oklahoma. I shared some of these things with you. Back to Texas, and then of course we flew out for our last 2 months, where we landed on the big island of Hawaii. Worked one Sunday with that little church in Hilo, but now we're working. We literally have one of the instructors at the School of Preaching is in Hilo right now, and we're trying to get some of the other ones to go as well, and we're trying to get all others who might be interested and willing to go to help out this small, struggling congregation. If only there were a congregation who's not only interested in giving of their money, but giving of their preacher for just 4 Sundays to take his wife to Hawaii. Yes. So, and then, of course, we worked with the Kona Church of Christ before coming back to town. And when we were leaving on our way out, Sherry was, after we took these pictures, Sherry was asleep, and I was trying to get some pictures. I'm a big picture taker, and I kind of liked this picture because it really kind of summed up a long year, but a wonderful year. A year that 1 year ago today, there was no way in the world we could have fathomed that God could bless us so much. You be sober in all things. Endure hardship. Do the work of an evangelist. Fulfill your ministry. That's what Sherry and I are doing. And I hope that that's what you guys will do as well. Not just in the giving of your money. Now that's next week, and that's a big deal, and your elders are leading you in a wonderful direction. But brethren, don't just pass the plate and say, I've done my job. No, your job is just beginning. Do the work. Please God. and enjoy the reward in the end. Thank you very much for your time. Y'all have a wonderful day.